Hello, and welcome to the Last Movie Outpost. We have got another interview with the wonderful Roger Nygard, who we've interviewed previously. The link is in the description. He is the director of such programs as Trekkies, Trekkies 2, and The Truth About Marriage, and has also worked as an editor on programs like Veep, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Who is America with Sacha Baron Cohen. Roger, thank you for joining us again.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me back again.
Really not a problem. And so, basically, you have a new book out. I've still got your original book.
Cut to the monkey. Yeah, I did not learn my lesson the first time, and I did it again.
So yes, you've got a new book out now. I'm going to have to read the description for this because it's quite the title. It is The Documentarian: The Way to a Successful and Creative Professional Life as a Documentary Business. Could you have made it any shorter? The title
as a documentarian, I try to teach people concise writing is good writing, concise editing is good editing, and so it's very difficult to be concise. I acknowledge it.
Fair enough. So, in a nutshell, what is the book about?
Well, it's really two things. One is that here's all my tips and tricks and secrets and all the mistakes I made for making documentaries. So you don't have to make the same mistakes. You can do a better job. When you're starting out, it's like, I've got a great idea. What do I do now? Well, here's what you do. Follow this list and you'll have a documentary in a year, 2 years, whatever. The other part of
Yes.
it is a case study about the making of Trekkies, which I use as my example for, it was my first documentary and where I made a lot of mistakes, yet it was a big success. And there are reasons why we got lucky and other reasons that we stumbled onto the right formula. And I document the selling of the film to Paramount, which took, you would think, and we sold, it was a record sale for that type of film at the time, but it took us 9 months from screening for distributors until we signed a contract with Paramount. And Paramount was the absolute last studio to look at it. They couldn't even be bothered to look at it until Universal made us an offer. So it was really a difficult time trying to sell our little film. We thought we'd go to a film festival, they'd snap it right up, but that's like winning the lottery. Typically, that's not what happens, and that's not what would happen with your documentary if you made one. Probably you'd really have to get out there and bleed a little bit to get it on movie screens or to get it in on a streamer to get it seen.
Again, that sounds really unusual because obviously Paramount, famous for making the Star Trek movies and so forth. What do you think held them off?
That's a great question. And I did learn some of the answers afterward. Partly it was, as a big studio, they were focused on grand slams. They wanted to hit, which is a baseball term, right? They wanted to hit the biggest hit with every movie. They weren't interested in little films.
Or just taking that chance on something type of thing.
Yeah, they wanted the big film with every hit. And so our film is not something that would have been on their radar. We had to kind of force it in front of them until they realized at some point, you know what, we can't allow anyone else to have this movie. And so they bought it partly out of fear, which is still a win for us. And, and it made complete sense once they thought about it, because obviously they had the Star Trek world and they knew better than anyone else how to position a Star Trek product. So it did make sense, but it wasn't easy to get them to focus.
Right. We'll come back to this in a little while because I do want to talk about your book first of all. But it's funny how you say that they don't want to kind of take the risk on things unless they know it's going to be a hit, because it seems like modern Hollywood is very much like that. All we kind of see is prequels and sequels and spin-offs of established IPs. And you think, like I say, with something like Trekkies, obviously, Star Trek has got a huge following around the world. You'd have thought that would have, for them, been a hit.
It would seem obvious. In hindsight, it was a hit, although when they put Trekkies in movie theaters, which they did, they put it in 340 theaters, which is not bad for a documentary. It's quite good. And it bombed. It didn't do very well at all. But they put it out on the same weekend as the release of the first Star Trek prequel, Star Trek 1.
Right.
And so we got crushed because everyone was paying attention to that. However, their theory was, and it worked, that just by putting it in movie theaters, it gets so much more attention and reviews and acknowledgement in the press than it would if you just put it onto, nowadays they just put it on a streamer or release it digitally, and no one knows about it because no one, right? Why should everything goes to digital? It's not special. If a film goes to a movie theater, it kind of makes it special. And because of that notoriety, that knowledge, it did great on home video and
Right.
ultimately it made $7 million by the time they finished counting.
That's still wonderfully impressive, though.
Yeah, for a
I
film
mean,
that cost us about $150,000 in
yeah,
hard costs.
ultimately, that's kind of what they're after, isn't it? If something costs cheap and then sells well, happy days. You could almost kind of give it like, I don't want to say like a cult status, but I mean, there's quite a few films that didn't really do particularly well in the box office, but then kind of found their home on home movies and then maybe on streaming. I mean, the one that springs to mind immediately is like something like Blade Runner. How it didn't do particularly well in the box office, but now it's almost like a cult film which is studied in film school. But obviously, for you, it must have been very exciting to let people actually find it on a new home and actually get to see it.
It's exciting when you make something and people see it and they react to it and it affects them. When I get an email from somebody saying, I watched your movie and it really affected me. And so, that touches me. It's like, wow, I affected someone. Something I did had an influence on someone's life in some way. I never watched Star Trek before, and then I watched Trekkies. I didn't know anything about it, and it really intrigued me. And I started watching, and now I'm totally into. I've gotten emails like that more than many emails like that, or people who watched it and said, "Wow, it really inspired me to go make my own fan film," because this was essentially the first fan film, feature documentary fan film, which was followed by many others about many other TV shows.
Again, it's fun. It's so wonderful to hear that even, like you say, I'm not going to obviously downgrade what you sort of said, but even in kind of on a smaller production like this, but it still touches people when they watch it. And like I say, I know being a Star Wars fan myself, but I also do still love Star Trek. When you see the behind the scenes of how these things are made and stuff, how wonderful it is and how it can be so inspirational. Now, in your new book, you actually say that what you're looking for is like a theme to sort of run through, almost following like the 3-act play like you would get in a movie. Explain that.
The biggest mistake, well, there's two big mistakes that I found when someone is making a documentary. Oftentimes, someone will say to me, "I've got a great idea for a documentary," and they'll pitch it to me, and what do you think? Like expecting me to like pick it up and run with it. And I usually, there's three things. The first is I'll say, "That's a great idea. Have you got $200,000 to put up to finance the shooting of it?" And then they go away pretty quickly because they're fast to spend your money and time, but not so much their own. So that's the first hurdle. Once somebody's making a documentary, I'll usually ask them, "Okay, what's your theme?" And if they look at me blankly, which they almost always do, then I help them a little bit. I say, "Okay, let's talk. What is a theme? A theme, it's like the moral of the story. It's the point you're trying to get across. It's the idea, the premise that underlies every scene in the documentary." And for me, my most recent film called The Truth About Marriage, my theme was a core question that I ask: why are relationships so hard for people? And I set out to solve that question, to solve that mystery and have an answer for an audience by the end. And that's asking the question at the beginning is what hooks the audience until the end. With a narrative film or a narrative documentary, your theme might be simple as good triumphs evil, or the hero gets the girl in the end, or love conquers all would be the theme in that scenario, or why why is your most important question, why this, why that, why. And so when you're asking a deep question, a big question, that will hook people. Now once you understand what your theme is, I usually tell people, write it down on a piece of paper, put it above your editing system and look at it, and that's going to be your guidepost for all your editing. Is every scene you're working on, related to this theme? And if it's not, you've got to ask yourself why it's in the movie. The next step is you should ideally consider your film in 3 acts or 4 or 5, multiple acts, just like a screenplay. You're the best, the most engaging documentaries that the ones you probably enjoy the most are probably very solid 3 act structure documentaries, just like a screenplay. What does that mean? It means there's a beginning where you introduce a protagonist who's got a goal or a problem, and you introduce what are the obstacles to that problem. Who is the antagonist? It could be a small group of protagonists and a group of antagonists, like maybe with a sports documentary. It's the team we're following. Are they going to win at the end? You propose their goal, and the obstacles are they've got to beat the other teams. That's a pretty clear example. And the ending of the movie, the 3rd act, is do they succeed or fail? What's the climax? How do they react to this moment? Do they get selected for the team? Do they get is there a judgment, a jury? Is there a verdict? Is there an arrest? If there's a mystery, some ending that you're working toward? Oftentimes, and I made this mistake on Trekkies, and so I'm trying. That's why I try to explain in the book, so people will avoid this pitfall. Sometimes people just start shooting interviews and footage, and then they end up with just one interview, bang, bang, bang after another, and that gets tedious. You've got to change it up with peaks and valleys in the story, and cutaways, and things other than the interviews, maybe archival footage, maybe reenactments, like Errol Morris, who made the film Thin Blue Line, introduced the idea of reenactments, which no one had ever thought of, staging things, faking things in a documentary to explain something that happened in the past, or in his case, to show alternate possibilities for how this arrest might have happened that led to when they pull over a car, and then one of the policemen gets shot, that leads to the arrest of someone who was on death row. Ultimately, he showed that this guy was probably innocent by showing how what was testified could not probably have happened by looking at these reenactments. Now, reenactments are common in documentaries all the time. We're used to it. It's normal. But there was a first person, Errol Morris, basically invented that. And so what are you going to use in your documentary to break things up? So it's not just a series of talking heads. So there's a story with an ending, with a protagonist, and hopefully some kind of obstacles and an antagonist against your hero. That's what makes it interesting. One last thing, probably every one of your favorite films, if you were to name one, Star Trek, Star Wars, or otherwise, is a fight between two entities. We like conflict. Story is conflict. So if your documentary doesn't have some kind of conflict, whether it's person to person, person versus society, person versus nature, man versus himself, like mental issues, or an idea, a clash of ideas, which is what The Truth About Marriage is, or my prior film, The Nature of Existence. Those are concept documentaries where ideas are clashing against each other. The greater the conflict, the more you'll engage an audience. And so I try to explain all these things to someone when they come to me with an idea for a documentary, to help them make sure, or to consider these things, so that they'll have something that will engage people. Otherwise, they're making a home movie. It's just going to be interesting to them and maybe their family.
Yeah. What I like as well is the way that you're talking about it is like I say, you have basically a character that you need to follow. And I think sort of any good movie is exactly the same. I was talking to somebody the other day about Back to the Future, how if you think about it too much, it makes no sense, and there's huge plot holes. But you love Marty, and so you're following his journey with glee. And you're saying apply the same principle to a documentary, that you have that main protagonist and it has to reach like a conclusion at some point.
Yeah, there's sometimes a desire to make documentaries about things, right? To profile a thing, like collectibles. If you're really into collectibles, I'm going to make a documentary about these things I love to collect. The problem with things is, and I asked Ken Burns about this when I was writing the book, I said, because he made a documentary about a thing, the Brooklyn Bridge. That was his first documentary, and it was nominated for an Academy Award. And I said, how do you do it? How do you make a story
Something
about
interesting.
exactly. And he said, you don't make documentaries about things. You cannot make it about a thing. It has to be about people. So Brooklyn Bridge is about the family, the Roebling family, who built the Brooklyn Bridge and all of the troubles and
Okay.
difficulties and near-death experiences they had toward completing the building of this bridge. And that's what makes it interesting to an audience. So find, if you're really into collectibles, find the person who's obsessed with collecting the most
Yeah.
Star Wars memorabilia and filling their shelves in their house with memorabilia. I guarantee you that person is going to be interesting.
Yes. Yeah, because again, sometimes obviously people can take it to an extreme and so forth, but again, it's that
That's
passion
great.
that they
That's what you
have.
want. You want the
Yeah.
extreme person. They're the most interesting.
When you're talking to somebody, I'm not into football or soccer as you call it, but when you're talking to somebody who's really into it, you really get that, passion from them of the game that they saw last night. And again, what you're saying is put that into a documentary that there is obviously something which grasps hold of the story. Let them run with it and really let that passion come out.
Yeah, human beings are fascinating, and obsession is particularly interesting and often really funny. If you, I mean, the nature of existence, my film, the nature of existence, the core question was, why do we exist? What is our purpose on this planet? And a lot of people go toward a religious explanation. Not everyone, the scientists go toward a cosmological exploration. But when you look at different religions, like I did with that film, if you're not a part of that religion, the rituals they do appear ridiculous to an outsider. It's like, that's idiotic. Why are you doing this weird thing? But to them, it's normal. That's what they grew up with. It's cultural, and it makes them feel a part of their culture, and it applies some kind of helpful salve on the anxiety that our frontal lobe creates. And you, like, if I was making fun of someone doing some weird ritual in another culture, and I guaranteed I have my own rituals that I do. Maybe they're not religious, but they probably look strange and unusual to someone from an outside. As a
Yeah.
documentarian, you're looking for people's human behaviors and profiling them, and it's fascinating. Human beings are fascinating.
You also talk in the book about the fluidity of kind of, you may have a question that you go in with, but as things develop, you kind of have to almost change your mind. Again, is that something that you've done on a couple of documentaries in the past?
Yeah, well, you're right. You do. You go. I go in with a plan and a goal, and what I consider to be an ending in mind, so I know where I'm headed. But when it's like a scientist, if you uncover data that's contrary to your original hypothesis, you have to revise your hypothesis. And if you're genuinely in search of the truth, as a documentarian, which you should be, then you have to revise the direction of the film you're going. There's a film called Capturing the Freedmans where they started off profiling this family and then uncovered some kind of incestual sexual harassment, or I forget exactly, but that became a much more interesting story. And so the direction of the film completely changed. Or Sherman's March is a film from the 80s. It was about the Civil War and General Sherman marching across the southern United States, and that's what the goal was of the filmmaker, Ross McElwee, when he set out. But it slowly shifted into a personal exploration about himself and his ex-girlfriends, which became more fascinating than the Civil War stuff he was originally profiling. And so he went with it, and that's what made the film so special and not just a dry documentary about the Civil War. So, and The Thin Blue Line, that started off with Errol Morris interviewing people on death row and the experts that testify about them, and uncovering and talking to this one particular death row inmate and getting a sense that, hey, I don't think this guy's guilty. And that he went into a whole new direction once he discovered that.
It's a fascinating process because, like you say, you have a plan, and obviously, say for example, with like a movie script, obviously it kind of adheres to that whole thing. It's very different to change. But what you're saying with documentaries, you have to be much more open minded in the way that you're approaching it.
With a narrative, you write it, and then you shoot it according to the screenplay. With a documentary, you shoot it and then you write it. You take all that footage into the editing room and you begin in earnest the writing process based on what probably an outline you had of some kind, a skeleton, a structure. But now the real writing occurs with the footage afterward.
Again, terribly fascinating. Just coming back to a point that we were talking about, you sort of mentioned earlier about how with modern films and so forth. I know at the Last Movie Outpost we talk about a lot of movies, and a lot of modern stuff, and we do find that a lot of modern Hollywood is just a kind of revamp of what they've originally done. How do you feel about the sort of state of entertainment today?
That's the way it's always been. People rewrite what came before. Shakespeare was rewriting stories that existed before him in many cases, and improving them. And that's the goal, is to take what you've absorbed as a human being and create a new version, a new mixture of what came before. Because they say there's nothing new under the sun, right? There's no new story. There's only 7 plots, and so is it going to be a romance? Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy wins girl back, or girl meets boy, whatever. Or is it going to be a monster in the house story? Or, aliens is a monster in the house story? Or what is it? But your version is going to be a unique new combination of elements. Anyway, that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got this book coming out. I did have a quick look up on IMDb. Are you working on any new documentaries or anything else like that at the moment?
The show I'm editing a Netflix series right now, a first season series called The Residents, which is a murder mystery comedy that takes place in the White House when a dead body is discovered one night during a very important dinner with the Australians who are being hosted. And I've been working on that all year. It's a big show.
Excellent. Oh, well, we can look forward to that when it's coming out. In the meantime, if you want to have a look at Roger's new book, The Documentarian, The Way to Be Successful in a creative professional life and a documentary business. I apologize, my reading is terrible. And like I say, if you made it shorter, it wouldn't have been an issue. But the book is going to be out on September the 17th. Where can people get that from?
Your favorite bookseller online, or hopefully your local bookstore. Or if they don't have it, have a talk with the manager and ask them to order it.
Excellent. Roger, again, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And like I say, we look forward to all your works that's coming out in the future.
Thank you. I love talking about the movie business, and this is a great place to do it.
I'm the same. Like I say, if you get me talking about movies, just shut me up. That's the problem. Roger, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Anytime.